Concern is intensifying, and people are questioning whether the beloved sport of football is simply too dangerous.
If you're a parent, you probably already know that soccer is one of the most popular youth sports in the country, with nearly 3 million kids playing it.
But with that popularity has come a concerning increase in injuries, especially concussions.
I was going to talk about whether it's a reaction or overreaction, whether it's Russell Wilson or Tom Savage, Jacoby Brissett or Cam. Every week we talk about this.
That means it's wrong.
Enough.
Right.
It's no secret that the attention to concussions has grown over the last few years. From the film Concussion, increased research and media attention, in addition to the concussions seen in the NFL, such as the scary incident that took place last year involving the 2 concussions Tua Tagovailoa sustained in 5 days, leaving everyone in a state of shock, panic, and prayer.
His ability to make adjustments at halftime. Tua rolling left with the grain, and down he goes. Slung down at his own 48-yard line. Josh Tupu. And, uh-oh.
Shifting away from football, concussions can happen in any sport, from going for a header in soccer to trying to catch a fly ball in baseball. So with the mass media attention about concussions, questions have amassed over what truly is a concussion, what research is being done, and how dangerous are concussions. In search for these answers, I spoke to a multitude of athletes, doctors, and a parent to learn what is truly going on. This is Under the Helmet, the truth about concussions.
7th grade, I remember it was the first day of practice and I didn't have cleats yet because it was the first day of practice, and I slipped and hit my head on the ground.
I mean, it was the worst case scenario. She played in another lacrosse game, and then she had a really, really busy weekend. So it took her a long time to recover. And then it just seemed like she would recover and then hit her head again.
I mean, I had symptoms for I would say 3 years continuously, just because I kept getting concussions.
Those were really, really hard years. I mean, it was basically most of high school that we were struggling through this and seeing doctors and trying to find treatments, and I was spending hours and hours on the internet.
I would be really tired all the time. I would feel nauseous. I couldn't really function in school or socially. I was just always sleeping. And I thought I was just sick. I thought I had a fever or something.
You could see that she was easily fatigued. Her pupils were dilated. She didn't seem like herself. She reported dizziness, headaches. So those were the primary immediate symptoms. But then she continued to have headaches a lot of the time.
My head hurt all the time, and also my brain wasn't functioning the same.
I mean, there would be times when we'd go skiing and she'd have a tumble, a fall, and she would be worried and say, I think I have a concussion. And we would say, I don't think you have a concussion. So there was a psychological component too, where it was was she having a headache? Was she just so anxious about having a potential concussion that it was making her think that she had one? And then there would be so much tension between us, because we would be like, Shar, I don't think it's a concussion.
I definitely wanted to keep playing. I wanted to play sports in college, and I knew that would mess up my season and hurt my ability to do so. But in the end, if I just stopped, then I probably would have been able to keep playing.
Honestly, wasn't until Charlotte had never shown any signs of learning differences or ADHD or any sort of cognitive issues until her last, I'll call it her last major concussion, before her freshman year of high school. She started at a new, much more challenging high school, I should say, and she was struggling specifically with auditory processing. But we didn't know that. We didn't know it, and then because she was struggling so much, we finally had a neuropsych evaluation. And that's when I think it was actually when we got the results from the neuropsych evaluation that we were like, you know, we just have to stop with the sports. Like, we just can't risk this anymore.
You lose it. Like, you struggle to remember things that happened that were big, sometimes big parts of your life that were like just there, that were huge stories or big moments. You're like, wow, that's like a memory unlocked almost. Like, you know it's in there, but you can't find it on your own. You need somebody else to help remind you of it. That's happened to me a bunch of times where, like, the few weeks after concussions, these events, these memories, these moments will happen, and I won't remember them ever. My name is Stephen Mallozzi, and I am a professional NASCAR driver. The one I had in 2021 from a car accident took me 6-7 months to get back to fully what I felt like was normal. It was really bad. Whole front end of my car was destroyed. I got out of the car when the accident happened, and I just lay down on the ground. I don't really know what happened. I was dazed. I was confused. And like, I remember this girl that I was talking to at the time went to the hospital with me, and I couldn't tell her who the Eagles had played last week. And that was 3 days prior, and I was at the game. And it was like really scary. And I would end up in the hospital for 6 or 7 hours getting scans and stuff done. And they're like, obviously this is concussion. So I went through all the steps, rehab. My final exams got pushed to the next semester, which was a complete disaster for me. And at the end of the rehab, when my script ran out, they cleared me from the concussion. I went to the eye doctor after they cleared me, and they said that it was closer to 2025 still. And I'm like, see, look at my past charts, and obviously going to the same eye doctor for decades. He's like, yeah. He's like, you're still a little off, man. And I remember, like, I would just keep doing those exercises that they trained me to do for months and months and months. And like, some days in class, I would just be exhausted. Like, I couldn't focus and I couldn't stay in there, and I would just be tired and my head would hurt, and I'd have to leave and go like for a walk or something. That was just easy. I couldn't play video games for sustained periods of time. And like, every time I would luckily during that period in the beginning of 2022, when I was really dealing with the rehab, because I would say by May or June it was better, and I didn't race again until July. And what's super bad about that is when you're driving race cars at 100 and something miles an hour, everything happens so fast, your brain really needs to be up to speed. If you go back out on a racetrack and you're not fit to drive at 180 miles an hour and you make a mistake and crash into somebody else, you're putting 40 different lives in jeopardy because, you know, you're just not fit to be doing what you're supposed to be doing.
There was no block in front of me, and I was like on the 10-foot line, and this middle's running behind and just smacks me in the face. And the ball went over the net and out on the other side of the court. It was pretty crazy. I think like right in the moment, it didn't bug me because I just had so much adrenaline from playing. But as soon as I finished the match and the game was over, I was like, Mom, my head is killing me. Hi, my name is Madison Morey. I am a volleyball player and a fourth year here at UVA. Things started to affect me when I actually got to college. So within my first couple, I think there was only one that took me about a month to recover. And the recovery can go up and down. So you can have some great days and you can have some really rough days. After I started getting more, it just took me more time to recover, and it took more time for me to truly understand that I'm actually going to have to rest, that I'm actually going to have to let my brain rest and not stress about it and just let myself be healthy. I experienced a lot of sensitivity to light and noise. So within like the ones in the middle throughout my process, I was very sensitive to being in a gym, being around the noise and all of that. And so I think, staying away from that, that was something I also experienced. And then my very last one, I lost like my concentration. I had like this 8-page paper I needed to write. And I just remember sitting down and I just like could not focus. And I don't know what it was. My head would just start pounding. I would like look at my notes, but I just like couldn't put anything together. I think when I hit my 6, I was more scared because I was like, 6 is a high number. You know, I do love this sport, but like, I'm also a senior. I'm also gonna be starting life like within the next couple of months. Like there is just, you know, I've been thinking about it when I got hit. And then part of me was like egging me on to be like, you know, you only have a couple weeks left. Like you'll recover, you'll go back and you'll just play for the last couple of weeks because, you know, you hate being away from your sport. And I loved being on the court with that team. And I think since it was my senior year, we also had senior night. We also had all these fun events coming up. And I was like, I do want to be on the court for that. And so I think that, you know, with how much longer my recovery kept getting pushed back because I kept having symptoms, I just thought more and more about it. And I was like, as much as I would love to be on the court and still be out there with my team, like I also need to prioritize my health, my future, and everything. And so it was a very difficult decision, but I knew that it would be what was best for me. And I guess I was just thinking more future-based because there was like a month left in the season. And I just wanted to be safe and I didn't want to be risked to get hit in the head again.
In the United States, there is a conservative estimate of 1.6 to 3.8 million sports-related concussions each year. So what exactly is a concussion? To get these answers, I spoke to Dr. Jacob Resch, an associate professor in the Department of Kinesiology, and Dr. Matthew Panzer, who is the deputy director at the Center of Applied Biomechanics.
To be very clear, concussion is a brain injury. It's a mild traumatic brain injury. Brain injuries happen on a spectrum from mild concussion to severe. Typically those individuals that are comatose or gunshot victims, etc. So with a concussion, it happens after you take a hit to your head, neck, or body. That force is then applied to the brain, and neurons within the brain, so neurons are the building blocks of the brain, those neurons stretch, and when they stretch, there's an amino acid called glutamate that binds with a neuron that allows for ions to flux in and outside of the cell. Now, in everyday life, this flux happens, with the exception of some things that typically are outside the cell, get inside the cell, and vice versa. It takes energy to help athletes achieve homeostasis again within that cellular environment. Unfortunately, the energy that the brain needs is in short supply, so it's an issue of supply and demand. The brain is demanding a lot of energy to recover. On the downside, it's not getting the energy it needs because cerebral blood flow is reduced by about 50%, as we know in animal models, but that also limits our ability to deliver oxygen and glucose or sugar to the brain, which the brain loves to run on in order to get things back to the way they normally occur.
So a lot of the prevailing myth right now is that someone bangs their head and their brain is rattling around and bouncing inside their skull, and that causes some sort of bruising, and that's a concussion, and that can't be further from the truth. The brain actually pretty much fills up almost the entire space of the cranium, and so there's really no room for it to bounce. It's also surrounded by a very thin layer of fluid called the cerebral spinal fluid, and that helps keep the brain buoyant within the skull, so it's neutrally buoyant, and so it just doesn't move around like you see in, I think it was the Will Smith concussion movie, where there's a scene where he puts a potato in an empty jar and you start shaking it. It's like, this is your brain.
I want to show you something. A human brain sits in a fluid completely disconnected from the human skull.
That is completely wrong. If you have a bowl of Jell-O and you shake it, you see that kind of soft material in the middle kind of wobble around. It's very similar to that. So there's no bouncing, but it's enough that when you really move your head rapidly, and actually in particular rotational movement, that really drives the outer parts of your brain and skull move very quickly, but because the material is quite soft, it actually lags behind and it causes some relative stretching of the axons and neural tissue, and that's what ultimately leads to injury.
With our collegiate athletes, the outcomes we're worried about are, one, this idea of an athlete's gone into play prematurely and they might open themselves up for a secondary injury. So a secondary injury could be another concussive event, or it could be a musculoskeletal injury such as an ACL tear, ankle sprain, or another injury, because an athlete may be responding a bit slower, or maybe they're more worried about having another concussive event, so they open up the rest of their body to secondary injury. So with that second concussive force or that insult to the brain, we might experience a prolonged recovery. So one of the things that people don't really appreciate is the majority of concussions, regardless of age, tend to recover within 14 days. A majority of those athletes will return to the field within 14 days. However, all we hear about via the media is the athletes that take a very long time to recover. Now, those athletes that do take longer to recover, they might be athletes that stayed in play while they still had a concussion. Or maybe they were put into play too soon after their injury, therefore they have symptoms that were either lingering or they have a second concussive force that then manifests into a longer recovery. And then for younger athletes, not necessarily our collegiate athletes, one condition that we do worry about is something called second impact syndrome, which unfortunately leads to mental and physical disability and or death for young athletes. And unfortunately about 3 to 4 deaths occur each year because of a mismanaged concussion or an athlete going back into play too soon. We still don't appreciate why that happens, but it does happen. And we need to do a better job at safeguarding our athletes like we do at the University of Virginia to make sure it doesn't happen to our athletes or younger athletes associated with the program.
With so much attention to concussions, what is being done? To start, Dr. Resch took me to UVA's concussion lab to learn about UVA's comprehensive concussion protocol.
The team works with that athlete to conduct a very thorough baseline assessment. So that baseline assessment consists of measures of neurocognitive function, balance, symptoms, patient-reported outcome measures of anxiety and depression. We also recently incorporated sleep measures into our protocol to understand what an athlete's trying to get back to following concussion, which is a very valuable asset to our protocol. For our symptoms, we use a symptom scale that not only looks at the presence of a symptom within the first 24 hours of their assessment. Okay, so have you had a headache in the last 24 hours? But we also look at its severity and duration. Was it brief or was it consistent throughout a 24-hour period? And for our balance assessment, we're very fortunate here. We have the gold standard for balance called the sensory organization test. In this test, we look at individuals' overall ability to balance, but also the contributions from what they feel with their feet, what they see with their eyes, but also the motion of their head in order to allow them to balance, to say, is there a deficit present or not?
During my time at the concussion lab, Dr. Resch simulated a number of their pre-tests on me, which included their balance assessments, which I found to be quite challenging, proving that for a concussed athlete, the difficulty and comprehensibility of these tests allows for Dr. Resch and his team to identify any symptoms present within an athlete.
After an athlete is suspected of having a concussion, our athletic trainers at the University of Virginia do a sideline assessment, which consists partially of those same measures, in order to remove the athlete from play and then put them into our protocol. Once that athlete is diagnosed with a concussion, once it was suspected, now it's been diagnosed, they return to their athletic training room or clinic daily and they complete a symptom inventory so we can track recovery. So again, we're looking for a high symptom burden immediately after injury, but as they get further away from the injury, symptoms will get better. As well as we're looking for markers of anxiety, depression, and then a more recent tool we've added is kinesiophobia, or the fear of movement, to make sure athletes are not only physiologically and physically able to get back into play, but we're also psychologically ready to go as well.
In addition to treating their athletes, UVA is part of a nationwide study to study concussions called Limbic Matters.
So Limbic Matters is the military and tactical athlete research study, which consists of 22 universities from across the United States. With these universities, we have collected 5 years worth of data from our respective sites in order to learn more about concussion and learn about what concussion is and what concussion's not, which has been really exciting. And in fact, we have a special issue of a journal called Brain Injury coming out in the spring, where it's just based on our research team's findings, which is really exciting. So our goal is to grow limbic matters to not just do a chart review, a retrospective chart review, but rather push forward with a prospective study to do two things. One, look at the best biosignal of concussion, knowing that there are over 110 clinical measures of concussion that are currently out there. The second thing of that is to develop a longitudinal study called Life Matters in order to look at the athletes as they retire from sport and go about their lives until the age of 45.
On the other side of Charlottesville, at the Center of Applied Biomechanics, Dr. Matthew Panzer and PhD student Jared Rifkin have geared their research and study of concussions from an engineering standpoint.
We often are doing the fundamental research of understanding what's causing injury, right? Using computer models to really kind of dig deep into the mechanisms, and then using this information to come up with algorithms or tools or equations to essentially relate forces, moments, strains to injury risks. So, and it's designed so that they could be used with certain types of dummies or certain types of environments, so that the people who are either designing helmets or airbags or setting regulation for vehicles, or even doing ratings programs, whether it's helmet ratings or crash ratings, they're using the work that we've done to translate what they're measuring in the dummy into a potential injury risk or outcome.
One metric Panzer created is called damage, a popular tool that is now used in a variety of industries.
It's designed essentially to be a tool that will work for sports athletes, sports concussions, motor vehicle, and even some military applications. So a whole bunch of different type of impact conditions, but it's really designed to kind of represent the response of the brain over all those things. And so that's being used right now by the NFL as part of one of their metrics for evaluating the safety of helmets, and it's highly correlated to what they're seeing on the field in terms of the type of helmet and the number of concussions with that type of helmet. The better the score you have, the more protective it seems to be. So this is kind of the downstream effect of using these tools that we develop and seeing, yeah, they have actually real world outcome of reduced injuries.
At the CAB, Panzer and his team use computational modeling to study concussions, a tool that is blooming across the industry.
The real benefit is we could run many simulations with small variations in things like helmet design to see if that particular design is more beneficial than the previous one, right? Rather than doing a trial and error process to figure out, hey, you know, if I give you this helmet and you run out and you hit your head, is it better than the helmet that you could have taken, right? So we don't want to do that sort of research. What we want to do is try to figure out with these modern tools what's going to be the best scenario, least risk of injury in a case where we don't want to subject you to those types of loads, obviously. So that's what the computational modeling is. It's in finite element in particular. It's really kind of the modern tool that we use for design. But in order for design, we need to figure out, you know, the tool that we need to design around, which is the human body. So car companies have been using it for 2 decades to look at crash worthiness. Football helmet companies are now starting to use it, for instance, to design better football helmets. And so that's why you've seen a lot of the innovation in football helmets in the last few years, is because they're taking these modern and advanced engineering techniques into their design process.
In the same building, PhD student Jared Rifkin is looking at modifying brain models to further study concussions.
We have general models that exist that represent like some subset of a population of brains. But what we're curious right now is, do we need to have more information in these models? Do we need to include like blood vessels in these models? Do we need to include the axons, the white matter in these models? And then do we also need to make it like subject specific? Like, can we take a person's brain scan, build them their own brain model, and then will those results give them like subject specific results, or will they match some, like, is the general model good enough is like one of the big questions we have. if we add in like blood vessels to the brain model, which is something that isn't really considered in the state-of-the-art models, we can get an idea of how the blood vessels are deforming in addition to the neurons. And maybe they're deforming in such a way that the blood vessels are going to show up as something that's failing. And maybe this could explain some injury patterns we see. What I was looking at was, if I have a population of brains, are there similar types that exist? And what I found was, yes, you can divide that subset of brains into two different types. And in that subset, I found that there were two different types of brains based on only looking at, and it's such a simplification. It was just looking at the wiring of the brain. But there's so many different factors that could also divide different brains. I mean, you can look at male brains and female brains. You can divide brains by size. Like, that's an important feature. So like large brains versus small brains. You can look at, again, like just the number of interhemispheric connections that exist. The vascular density, how many blood vessels are in a brain.
After that, I branched beyond Charlottesville to learn about Q-collar, a brace worn around the neck that reduces the impact of concussions.
So basically what he designed is like a seatbelt in the skull, but using your own anatomy. So by compressing just gently, 30% compression, and it's very important to make the difference between compression and occlusion. The blood's still getting out, but by gently compressing on those veins, all the veins inside your brain are in the periphery. So if you think about it, they're in the space between the brain and your skull. They're not inside deep in the brain. So the veins will now get bigger because the blood can't get out quite as quickly, and they provide a much tighter fit for the brain inside the skull. That's how it works. You know, we went on to study it, and the FDA got involved in the study. You know, almost 500 athletes from St. Xavier High School in Cincinnati, Ohio, and Cincinnati Children's Hospital, and basically studied athletes through their entire season with the collar or without it. Half of them wore the collar, half didn't. They all got imaged out to 2 years after their season. But we had to study something that was concrete and where you couldn't question it. So the best way to do it is white matter lesions or shear injuries in the brain. And the way you do that is something called diffusion tensor imaging, or DTI imaging, which is a routine imaging for trauma patients. The gray matter and the white matter in your brain, which are different parts of the nerves, are anchored differently. So if your brain accelerates or decelerates, because they're anchored differently, they can tear where they're attached. It's called a shear injury. And it's very, very sensitive to results or the result of trauma. If you didn't wear the collar, 78% of the athletes had these brain injuries. Hey, think about it, these are high school kids. And it's not just football, it's football, lacrosse, hockey, soccer, boys, girls, everybody was in the study. There's no safety limitations on the collar. There's extensive safety studies that show there's no risk to wearing it. But if you wore the collar, only 23% or something of athletes had injuries like that. Same as sort of if you're in a car accident with a seatbelt on. It doesn't eliminate any risk, but it certainly mitigates the risk, keeps you from flying through the windshield.
With advancements in immediate concussion treatment, the question is, what can be the long-term effects of multiple concussions, and what's that like?
How many is too many, right? That's the question. An athlete might have one concussion and they respond poorly to it, and that was all it took for that one athlete to retire from that sport. Maybe they have a prolonged recovery, and if they go back into the sport, maybe they should consider a different position, or maybe they should try a different sport altogether. So for one athlete, it might just be one. With other athletes, they could have 3 or more concussions. And as long as that their medical data suggests that they're performing at the same level as their pre-injury or baseline performance, we see no deleterious effects for them to continue with their sport. Remember, concussions are not good. I'm not saying that everyone should kind of back off on the concern about concussion. Rather, I'm saying if a concussion is managed appropriately, and athletes return to play appropriately, and the medical decisions are made in an informed manner athletes will get better. They will successfully return to their sport. And if they don't, we need to find out why. What else is going on? And a lot of times, and this is unfortunate, a concussion happens, a concussion resolves, but then we start dealing with things unrelated to the concussion that maybe were there before the injury occurred, such as a psychiatric history or other conditions that might cloud clinical judgment after a concussion occurs. And again, maybe it is the concussion, but for the most part, maybe it's something else that the athlete brought with them to the injury that then is picked up medically after the injury occurs.
Every time I get a concussion, it gets more difficult to come back to. And I think because I'm so specifically trained to have great reflexes, great vision, great reaction time, all this other stuff, I really notice it more when I'm going through this rehab, and I'm really struggling more and more. And like other people, like, you seem fine to me. And I'm like, no, everything just seems wrong. Like, I can't explain it. Everything is slowed down. Everything is just not right in my head right now. And I think my last concussion, it was the least severe concussion I had. I actually just got cleared from it a couple of days ago. Was this past November, and it took me 2 or 3 months to get back to fully normal from it, because I've had so many of them that it's everyone builds on the last one.
I wouldn't say normal, but I've been in a lot of physical therapy for my eyes and for like the head pain and everything. I wouldn't say it's returned to baseline like pre-concussion, but it's pretty good. Like now I don't, on the like day-to-day, I don't think like, oh, this is because of my concussion symptoms. It's usually not hindering me that much.
Spent maybe 6 months at Burke Rehab Hospital going to 3 times a week physical therapy. I don't know if she talked about that, but she went to OT, PT, she did speech and language, and because she had ongoing vestibular system issues that were affecting her balance.
I took my recovery process so seriously that I just knew I wanted to get over it and not have it affect me in the future. And that was one of the things that was really difficult when I made my decision my senior year of medically retiring, because I did not want any future health effects for me, and I knew that with the time I had left in the season that it would just be the best opportunity for me to be healthy and focus on my future and focus on my recovery. And so I think since I took my recovery so seriously and throughout the times, and no matter how many I had, I've been lucky to say that there haven't been any long-term effects that I've been dealing with.
But what about football, the sport of highest concern in the U.S.? To get that perspective, I spoke to Chris Keating, a former NFL linebacker, to learn about the effects concussions have had on him post-retirement.
All I can do is point to the fact that when I get done playing in the NFL, I was already in the investment management business during the off seasons. I had worked for a couple of my last years. I was going to make sure, because I was an undrafted free agent coming out of college, and I felt like I had to make the team every year. I didn't think I had a guaranteed spot. So every year I thought I could be, looking for a real job. And I decided in the off seasons to start working. And I had to use my brain, in the investment business. And then when I did retire, I actually went to law school at night. I worked in the investment world by day, went to law school at night. And so, in many ways, it'd be hard for me to quantify it providing, any long-lasting impact at that time. Today, I'm 66 years old. Today, do I forget things? Yes, but I still actively am engaged doing stuff. I do not feel as though I'm at a real deficit. So I can only say I think they had an impact on my life, and and in many ways probably on how I felt at times, ups and downs and things like that. But I was somebody who just was raised to try and find a brighter side, get on with, a brighter day, and don't get caught up in the past and just keep moving forward and trying to do it positively. And that's what I've tried to do.
As Keating functions post-retirement, other NFL players have been seen to suffer from chronic traumatic encephalopathy, more commonly known as CTE, a term that has become prevalent in the media.
Chronic traumatic encephalopathy is a postmortem diagnosis. It is a condition that is described that can only be diagnosed postmortem, so after death, where tau protein accumulates in the depths of the sulci, or the folds of the superficial aspects of the brain. And more specifically, it's near the vascular structures in those folds, right? And those tau protein deposits have been associated with cognitive decline, irritability, impulsivity, and other deleterious consequences that have been associated with concussion, especially in athletes that are later in life. And more recently, they found evidence of CTE in younger individuals. But please keep in mind with CTE, the lowest level of CTE, tau protein deposits can be very mild, very, very small. However, that still meets the criteria for CTE to be diagnosed. Those same tau protein deposits could be caused from a variety of issues. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people are walking around that would still meet the criteria for CTE that just don't realize it. And maybe they have a tau protein deposit in the depths of their sulci. However, clinically, it's not manifesting into any type of behavioral abnormality. It's just there. So, for example, individuals that have repetitive surgery, that go underneath general anesthesia, that are diabetic, that go through massive weight gain and massive weight loss, as well as individuals that abuse anabolic substances or ergogenic aids, substance abuse, whether it's alcohol or drugs, all have an increased risk of tau deposition in the brain, right? But we just don't hear about that, right? So with CTE, again, it can only be diagnosed following death or post-mortem. And my biggest concern about that is, unfortunately, people are being diagnosed with the condition while living, and they're told, well, there's really nothing we can do about this. In reality, there are things that we can do, especially there has not been a strong clinical profile built around an athlete with CTE as of now, as of 2023. However, individuals who are experiencing depression, who are experiencing anxiety, who are having difficulty in life, need to seek medical care. Those are treatable conditions, and to help not only the athlete, but the family members around that athlete so they don't succumb to a worsening condition.
In addition to CTE, there's still so much we don't know about concussions, such as the study of subconcussive blows.
As of recent, in 2010, the term became more and more popular called subconcussive injuries, which we now know are any injury that happens to, or any impact that happens to an individual that does not result in a concussion. It's really vague, right? So any hit that does not result in a concussion is a subconcussive injury. Along with that, individuals have started paying attention to repetitive head impacts. So the number of times an individual has contact with their head during football and other collision type sports or sports in general. And so a lot of research is conflicted right now, depending on who's publishing it, where the data came from, the methods of that research to say, when was the first concussive event, or how many repetitive head impacts does someone undergo during practice, and what are the consequences of that? Again, I think it comes down to, it's a really vague issue. If someone is not preventing with the signs or symptoms of concussion, they're showing no deleterious consequences of participating in sport besides just general fatigue and soreness. It's really hard to say, when do we remove an athlete from play? When do we provide that medical care? When it's routine. And I think it's going to be a challenging issue to put our finger on. It makes sense, right? Repetitive head impacts are like pitch counts. You know, is there an association to the number of repetitive head impacts and mid-season, late-season outcomes? And I think that research is still very, very young in that regard to say, is there something to this alternative way to look at the biomechanical forces to the head, neck, or body, and what that means clinically?
I do think that there needs to be more attention paid to other injuries besides neuronal injuries. And I think that in recent time, there's been like a big shift. Like I like to imagine like, there's like a pendulum. So like way back in the 80s, there's a lot of focus on bleeding injuries. And then people started getting the tools to study neurons and MRIs and look at the white matter of the brain. They're like, oh, this seems like it's very useful. And it swung towards neuronal injuries. And then that took off. And now we have these tools for white matter and neuronal stuff, and we could, like people are finding you could apply that back to the blood vessels and looking at bleeding injuries again. There's like the shift of the pendulum back to like what was being studied before, but at like a different scale. It's not these big brain bleeds, it's something more local and smaller.
The message I want to convey to stakeholders, and stakeholders being parents, athletes, administrators, coaches, teachers, is to create a culture of honesty. We live in a society where the boy cried wolf, right? And the idea is don't tell someone when anything bothers you, rather you just want to go about your life and not cry wolf too many times. That needs to change, right? Especially when it comes to concussive events.
I think growing up, I would hear the term, but I guess I just never knew like what exactly it was until my very first one. And so I think that, you know, as education continues to grow and people are learning more and more things each year, I definitely think it would be important for there to be more information about concussions and different types of injuries out there, especially to young kids who have athletic abilities that stand out, you know, like these injuries are going to be a part of their game, and I think it's important for them to know like what this is, what it looks like why is it important, why do I need to know about it? You know, I think that will help them in the future for when they do experience one and something does happen, that they will have the right knowledge to learn from it.
If you see the amount of support that teams have with athletic trainers now being aware of concussions and the signs of concussions and the training associated with concussions and how we treat concussed athletes in terms of getting them healthy again, that has just really kind of bloomed. And it's really an education piece and enabling and getting the right personnel involved to help the athlete. And it's been really good at the university level because there's those people here to do research that student athletes, you know, get that support. And so it's slowly trickling down to, you know, going from the professional leagues to the collegiate level and hopefully into high schools and things like that, where there's so many more student athletes.
I don't really think about it that often, and like maybe I should. But in brutal honesty, like it's, what am I going to do? I can continue to move forward to be better about it in the future, but the way that my head has been treated and the concussions that have happened. I can't undo them. And like at the end of the day, I don't know that I'll ever let a concussion stop me from doing what I've wanted to do in life. And I guess I kind of hold that attitude towards a lot of different things. And concussions are just another thing on that list. Am I scared of it? Maybe a little. Do I wish I didn't have them? Almost certainly.
There's nothing I can do about it now. Like it's already, the damage is done. So I just hope like more people get to learn so they don't end up with these same things I had.
A headache, dizziness, nausea, fogginess, sensitivity to light, noise are all symptoms of a concussion. An athlete might push through those symptoms and say, I'm going to continue to play because I don't want to let my coach down, I don't want to let my team down, I don't want to be perceived as weak, or it's just a concussion, which is inappropriate, or they might not recognize the signs or symptoms of a concussion, so they just don't say anything. Creating a culture of honesty at home and saying, Mom and Dad, I'm not okay, and then having Mom and Dad take that athlete or their child to a healthcare provider to say, they complained about this last night, can you check them, right? There's nothing wrong with that. It takes time, it might take money. However, it's also the brain. It's their child's longevity that we're worried about. Sport's temporary. We want someone to remain in sport. We want them to be physically active for the remainder of their life, right? But we don't want to put them back in the sport inappropriately. That might lead to a longer recovery from concussion or rare yet catastrophic outcomes, right? So that culture of honesty is really important. And it starts at home, right? And it's a matter of saying, I want you to tell us something when something's not right, right? And let us help you determine what the next logical step is. And the second piece for the parents that have had a history of concussion and just shook it off and say, well, I've had several concussions, I'm fine. Again, that's inappropriate. We know way too much now in order to say, let's let an athlete go back into play following a concussion. And granted, athletic training is still a relatively young profession. Athletic trainers weren't at my high school until I was a senior. And that athletic trainer did remove me from play after a concussion, where I've had 6 prior concussions. And so, yes, I've had concussions, and I look back at the way that behaviorally I was acting, and I wish somebody had removed me from play. And so now our goal is to make sure that our athletes feel comfortable with talking to their parents, talking to athletic trainers, talking to coaches, and say, I don't feel right, in order to undergo the appropriate medical treatment.
If I had any advice, it would be to truly take the recovery process seriously. I think that it can be very mentally draining and difficult for you to, sit in that dark room for hours all day and not be allowed to go on social media, which is growing this day. Like, everyone's on social media, everyone's on their phones. Like, that's how they connect, that's how they socialize. Like, it is difficult to be away from that, but when you are injured and have a brain injury, like, that is the only thing that's going to heal you, and is staying off your phone, being in that dark room, like, not using your brain, not concentrating on anything. Like, that's the only thing that's really going to make you better. And so my advice would be to truly trust that process. Like, I know how difficult it can be, but if you want to return to your sport, if you want to be healthy, if you don't want to have any further brain damages, then you truly need to listen to doctors and take that seriously, because that right there takes you from 1 week to return to a month to return. And so I think that is super, super duper important. And then also, if you need to talk to anyone, talk to them, because you can't carry every single emotion on your chest, especially when you're already recovering. You can't let those things get to your mind and stress you out, because that just also pushes back your recovery. So I think it's important for people to know that they can use their voice when it's needed, no matter what emotions they're feeling, because recovery is going to be a roller coaster, going to be highs, lows, all of that. So it's just truly about taking that process seriously and not being afraid to talk to people when it's needed.
The research and knowledge on concussions has come a long way and will continue to improve. There's no denying that concussions are bad, so it is important to be vigilant and knowledgeable about them. It is also essential to adhere to medical professionals if you believe you've experienced one. Sports are one of the greatest things in the world, and our brain is an essential organ in our body. Prioritize your health and well-being, as life is much larger than the game we play between the lines.